My grandfather drove 6 hours for my brother's wedding, yet my parents shoved him behind the trash bins. My mother sneered, "That filthy beggar will disgrace us." When I stood up for him, she hit me and kicked me out. Minutes later, his private jet touched down. Can you imagine the kind of family that would banish their own grandfather to a trash can at a wedding rehearsal, then slap their daughter for speaking up? Yeah, that was my family. But what happened next? Well, let's just say I ended up owning the entire vineyard they were so desperate to claim. I'm Kayla, and I'm 32. That day, I stepped onto the sprawling grounds of my brother Jason's wedding rehearsal. I truly, desperately believed this one dinner could mend years of fractured history, you know? Like, finally, we could all just be family. I was tragically, brutally mistaken. I was wearing this deep forest green dress, found pre-loved in Boston, with delicate cap sleeves, soft, unassuming. It was pretty much the last piece in my wardrobe that still felt like me. The Napa Valley sun beat down, sharp and unforgiving, casting these long, stark shadows. The air hummed with the rich perfume of roses and savory grilled duck. Champagne flowed, an endless river of sparkling flutes, but not a single one was offered my way. A server glided past, eyes fixed straight ahead, like I was totally invisible. Guests swirled around me, draped in designer silks and perfectly tailored suits, their hair sculpted with products I wouldn't even know how to pronounce. I caught a fleeting glimpse of my reflection in a gleaming glass door, wind-tousled hair, no makeup, my freckles peeking through. I looked less like a guest and more like an accidental bystander. Then, my mother's eyes snagged on me from across the patio. She started this slow, deliberate advance, her lips pressed thin, her gaze narrowing, like she was assessing some unexpected damage. "You look," she paused, her eyes doing a critical sweep from my worn shoes to my neckline. "Acceptable." That was it. No embrace. No warm inquiry about my 6-hour journey from Boston. Not even an acknowledgement of the fact that I'd RSVP'd alone, while everyone else arrived in pairs, trios, or full-blown retinues. Before I could even utter a single word, she pivoted, moving to greet someone adorned in a tighter dress and, undoubtedly, a more impressive bank balance. Jason, my brother? He didn't so much as glance my way. Or maybe he just pretended not to. He was too engrossed, roaring with laughter among his college crew beneath the ancient olive trees, one hand clasped around a glass, the other possessively encircling his fiancée's waist. Her gown, a vision of ivory lace, shimmered with a price tag that likely dwarfed my entire graduate school tuition. When her eyes eventually met mine, there was no spark of recognition, just a cool, polite detachment. We'd supposedly met twice. I drifted to the fringes, feigning a search for anyone, anything. I hadn't come to create a scene. I had simply come because, despite all their monumental flaws, they were still my family. And then I saw him. A quiet town car glided to a halt at the edge of the crushed stone circle. The door eased open, and out stepped my grandpa Joseph. His frame was bent with age, but his posture held a stubborn dignity. He wore a dark blue suit, one I suspected hadn't seen the light of day since Grandma's funeral. His tie was askew, his knuckles mottled with age spots, but his eyes, they lit up like twin stars when they found me. "Kais," he rasped, his voice thin as a whisper but full of unwavering certainty. "You're the only reason I'd ever fly this far." I clung to him for a long, quiet second, inhaling the faint, familiar scent of old aftershave and peppermint gum. He'd crossed half the country, 6 hours in the air, for this moment. At 82, it seemed no one else truly cared. Not a soul bothered to walk over and greet him. I offered to guide him to his designated seat, but a staff member beat me to it, ushering us toward the farthest reaches of the patio. We walked past the fragrant flower arch, skirted the tranquil pond, circled the sprawling outdoor kitchen, until there it was, a lone, flimsy plastic chair, squeezed between two overflowing trash receptacles, right beside the low hum of heat vents from the catering tent. My chest tightened, a vice. This has to be a mistake. The staffer merely offered a dismissive shrug, gave a quick glance at his clipboard, and vanished. I turned to my mother, standing less than 20 feet away, casually adjusting a sparkling bracelet in the afternoon sun. "Why is Grandpa sitting there?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper, just hoping, it was some horrible error. Her gaze flickered past me, as if I were merely part of the scenery, an unimportant backdrop. "He insisted on coming. I told him he wouldn't enjoy himself." But, she concluded with a chilling shrug, "Beggars can't be choosers." "He is not a beggar," I retorted, my voice low, but now laced with steel. She leaned in closer, her whisper cutting through the warm air like shards of ice. "That old man will humiliate us. The way he speaks, the way he eats, the way he smells." "Are you serious?" I looked at her, truly looked. Her face was drawn, emotionless, utterly devoid of warmth. There was no pretense left. I walked away, my hands clenching into tight fists at my sides. But for me, this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. As guests began to gravitate towards their tables for the rehearsal dinner, I rose from the one where I'd been strategically placed next to the valet's son, yes, really, and stepped onto a small, elevated platform near the welcome arch. "Excuse me," I announced, gently tapping a fork against the rim of my champagne glass. The low hum of conversations died. Dozens of faces swiveled, turning toward me. "I just wanted to ask." My voice wavered. I took a deep, fortifying breath. "Why is my grandfather seated near the trash bins while strangers occupy the family table?" A heavy silence descended. Then, the sharp click of heels on stone. My mother stormed down the aisle, her hand already raised before my mind could even process the motion. The slap echoed, a sharp crack across my face, like a sudden, jarring rifle shot. Gasps erupted from the assembled crowd. "You ungrateful wretch," she hissed, her cheeks blotched with furious color. "You absolutely do not belong here." She then spun toward a nearby staff member. "Escort her out." I stumbled backward, the burning sting spreading across my cheek. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I simply nodded, turning to leave. My heels snagged in the rough gravel, the skirt of my dress dragged across the dusty stones. Jason averted his gaze. My father fussed with his collar, pretending to absorb the intricate details of the wine list. But Grandpa stood up. He didn't utter a word. He simply met me halfway as I reached the edge of the patio, his hand slipping something into mine, his fingers gently pressing mine around it. It was a green silk handkerchief, the edges worn, a faded silver K meticulously stitched into one corner. I clutched it. I kept walking, past the well-manicured hedges, until I reached the parking circle, where I sank onto a low stone wall under the cool shadow of an ancient olive tree. The handkerchief lay in my palm, a mysterious promise I didn't yet comprehend. My heart didn't break. It had shattered years ago. This moment was merely confirmation. They had, yet again, shown me precisely who they were. And then came the sound. Wheels. Jet wheels, almost. It wasn't the familiar crunch of a car on gravel. This was deeper, smoother, the distinct rumble of something massive, moving with slow, undeniable purpose down the side path just beyond the vineyard. I turned toward the noise, squinting into the late afternoon sun. A black Rolls-Royce, sleek as a predator, glided into view, its polished surface mirroring the golden light of the fading day. Behind it, 2 more SUVs followed, a silent, imposing procession. I remained seated on that stone wall, my fingers tightly interlaced around Grandpa's silk handkerchief, not daring to hope. The driver's door opened. A chauffeur, moving with quiet urgency, stepped out and opened the rear passenger door. It swung open with an almost regal grace, and there he was. Grandpa. Not the stooped, weary man from an hour ago, but upright, his posture commanding. His dark suit was impeccably tailored, his shoes gleamed, and over his eyes, genuine sunglasses, not the flimsy drugstore kind he used to fumble for. 2 tall, serious men in dark suits emerged behind him. He spotted me, paused, and slowly removed his shades. "Well, sweetheart," he declared, his voice clear, strong, and ready to ignite a storm. I rose slowly to my feet. The gravel shifted beneath my heels, but I didn't falter. Not this time. What's happening? I asked, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm. Grandpa simply offered a tight, knowing smile, then subtly tilted his head toward the main venue. That's when I noticed it. The 3 young men of the waitstaff at the gate, clad in black vests, had frozen completely still. One whispered to another. The tallest reached for the walkie-talkie clipped to his belt, then hesitated. As Grandpa took a deliberate step forward, they didn't stop him. One even unlatched the very side gate I had just been shunted through, humiliated and dismissed. Grandpa extended his arm. Let's see if your brother recalls who actually owns this land. I stared, bewildered. Wait, what? But he offered no explanation, merely continued walking. The realization struck me like a blast of icy water. This place wasn't just some exorbitantly priced rental venue. No, we weren't merely guests here. This was home. Or, at the very least, it was Grandpa's home. I fell into step behind him, still clutching the green silk in my hand. The initial K shimmered faintly in the sun. It no longer felt like a mere token. It felt like a proclamation. As we neared the reception area, the lilting strains of music drifted out from the open-air patio. The crowd was midway through a toast. My mother's voice, amplified and dripping with self-satisfaction, was clearly audible, extolling Jason's vision and ambition. The words twisted my stomach into knots. Grandpa didn't flinch. The 2 men accompanying him subtly positioned themselves, flanking the wooden entry as the grand doors swung inward. I lingered at the periphery, half hidden behind a low hedge of potted olive trees, observing. Heads turned. Dozens of them. Then silence. Not the polite, expectant kind, but thick, awkward, disbelieving, the kind that compresses a room and steals its breath. Jason lowered his champagne glass mid-sip. My father's face went bone-white. My mother froze mid-sentence, the microphone still clutched in her hand. Grandpa walked straight through the stunned assembly, as if parting a sea of bewildered faces. Eyes didn't just follow. They trailed in utter disbelief, as if grappling with an impossible equation. He ascended the small stage beside the string quartet, gently relieving my mother of the microphone, without a single word. She didn't resist. She merely stepped back, blinking at him as if he were an apparition. I wasn't going to say anything, Grandpa began, his voice calm, yet imbued with immense weight. Didn't want to cause a stir. It is a wedding, after all. A few nervous, scattered laughs broke the tension. But perhaps, he continued, his gaze sweeping across the room, it's time people understood what truly built this family. From my vantage point, I saw my father's hand twitch toward his pocket. Jason stared intently at his shoes. The bride's parents exchanged confused glances. The waitstaff had collectively frozen. I stepped in then, not down any aisle, not toward the family table, but through a discreet side entrance, quiet and steady. I took a stand near the stone pillar by the reception arch. I felt no need to speak. No desire to. I simply watched. One of the security men stood beside me, offering a subtle nod, as if confirming my rightful place. I reached into my pocket, my fingers tracing the familiar threads of the handkerchief once more. For the first time that entire day, I didn't feel small. Grandpa pressed on. I'm 82, he stated, his voice devoid of emotion. I built this vineyard with my own 2 hands. I named it after my late wife. I entrusted it to the family, believing it would be used for a greater purpose. He turned slightly, his gaze sweeping over the astonished guests. But when I arrived here today, no one seemed to know, because no one bothered to ask if I'd even be invited. I wasn't. My name wasn't on the guest list. The driver didn't even recognize me at the gate. A ripple went through the crowd, small gasps, hushed murmurs. I sat near the trash bins, he continued, his tone dry, right next to the kitchen vent. Now, I'm not one for grand displays, but I certainly understand the difference between a seat and a message. He turned directly toward my parents. And I received that message, loud and clear. The silence now was utterly crushing. My mother gripped the back of a chair, her knuckles stark white. My father stared fixedly at the floor. Jason remained frozen. I stood motionless, neither flinching nor shedding a tear. This moment wasn't about vengeance. It wasn't even about justice. It was simply truth laid bare. And then Grandpa uttered 7 words that collectively stole the room's breath. The air within that glass-ceilinged reception hall became dense, suffocating, in a way no summer afternoon ever should. Grandpa's voice cut through the murmurs like a slow, deliberate knife through silk. I built this empire for her, not you. For a beat, there was only silence and unnerving, breathless quiet, then collective gasps, then the gentle clinking of forks against porcelain as hands trembled. Even the pianist's notes died midair. I felt every eye in the room pivot toward me, no longer hidden in the shadows at the rear. I hadn't consciously moved closer, just followed an instinct. But there I stood, no longer concealing myself. Grandpa raised a hand and pointed. Her, he repeated. Jason's fiancée leaned into her friend, whispering, "Who is she?" The photographer, who moments ago had been capturing candid shots of the champagne toast, slowly lowered his camera, as if even his lens had blurred with confusion. I heard my own sharp intake of breath before I realized I was holding it. The green handkerchief in my palm felt like an anchor, rooting me to the floor. Grandpa took another step forward. He didn't rush. He didn't raise his voice. He simply looked at my father, meeting his gaze. Squarely. I left the land in her name because she was the only one who visited me when I was ill. You remember, don't you, Richard? My dad's face lost all its customary performative glow. That polished, charismatic smile he always reserved for such events vanished. He looked like a man whose stage lights had just abruptly short-circuited. You altered the forms, Grandpa continued, his voice unwavering. Didn't you? While I was still recovering. My chest tightened. The memory struck me before I could suppress it. The winter, 3 years prior, the pneumonia scare. Everyone else had been too busy, too far away. I was the one who navigated icy roads to sit with him in that drafty cabin. I brought soup. I read to him. I answered his frantic calls in the dead of night when his breathing terrified him. And then, silence. After a few weeks, his number stopped ringing. I'd simply assumed he had recovered and pulled back. My mother whispered something to Jason, her lips barely moving. Grandpa sharply raised a hand. Don't. Not today. The entire room had fallen silent again. The kind of quiet that makes you acutely aware of the smallest sounds. Someone's bracelet jingled softly as it slid down their wrist. A baby's faint cry drifted in from outside. But inside, it was just raw truth, thick and oppressive, hanging in the air. Then Grandpa reached into his blazer pocket and produced an envelope. He turned, walked toward me, and held it out with steady fingers. I stepped forward, meeting him halfway. "This is yours," he said, as he placed the envelope in my hand. It always was. My fingers trembled as I took it, but I didn't open it. I simply gazed at the heavy, cream-colored paper, sealed, notarized, dated. He changed that will. Jason blurted out suddenly, stepping forward, his hands slightly raised, as if attempting to quell an uprising. Whatever that is, it's not legal. He changed it. Months later, one of our uncles, mother's cousin, I believe, rose from his table and asked, "Is that true?" I finally looked at the envelope. The date, printed clearly across the top, was 2 months before Grandpa's illness, before the pneumonia, before the crushing silence. Grandpa's voice resonated, not loud, but thunderous in its moral weight. "You told the lawyer I was mentally unfit. You forged the medical affidavit while I was sedated. You used my hospital stay as cover." He then slammed his cane down on a nearby table. The sharp, unexpected crack made several guests jump. "You stole it," he declared, pointing at my father, not from me, but from her. I felt a hot flush creep up my neck. My father remained speechless. His mouth worked, but no words emerged. Jason still stared at his shoes, as if they offered some immediate escape route. And then I finally understood. The phone calls that had stopped. The sudden, chilling silence. The abrupt change in my family's behavior toward me. They'd gone quiet, not because Grandpa had pushed me away, but because they had. Because they had simultaneously severed his voice and mine. I didn't cry, but my hands continued to tremble. People began to stir. A woman in a navy dress whispered, "This is getting ugly." Another murmured softly, "I saw that girl with Mr. Harrove at the farmer's market last fall." He held her hand like a daughter. Jason stepped forward, attempting to reassert control. Look, this isn't the proper time or place. Yes, I said, for the very first time. Yes, it is. My voice held no tremor. I didn't shout. I simply stated it as undeniable fact. You threw me out. Remember? You told me I didn't belong here. You said Grandpa was an embarrassment. You all sat him behind the trash bins like he was disposable. And now you're concerned about timing. The silence that followed was different now. No longer shocked, but deeply exposed. Grandpa stepped up to the stage, walked straight to the officiant, and leaned toward the microphone. He surveyed the crowd, not a trace of apology in his eyes, only unwavering resolve. Like a man who had patiently awaited this exact moment for years. Then he spoke. Cancel the wedding. This family requires a reckoning first. The officiant's hands quivered as he slowly closed the leather-bound book before him. You could almost hear the pages settle, like still water after a stone is finally dropped. He glanced nervously at Grandpa, who stood mere feet away, still gripping his cane as if it were the sole anchor in the room. Are you absolutely certain, sir? The officiant asked, his voice fragile. Grandpa gave a single, emphatic nod. There will be no vows today. This family is poised to split down the middle, and no one makes promises while standing on broken ground. Lily's hands flew to her mouth. What? What is happening? She choked out, mascara already streaking beneath her eyes. Jason remained rigid, his face a locked mask somewhere between disbelief and dread. Around the room, guests began to shift uncomfortably in their seats. Dresses rustled, chairs squeaked, and for a long moment, not a single word was uttered. And me? I stood motionless, my arms stiff at my sides, as if witnessing a slow-motion fire consume a home I once inhabited. And that's when Grandpa spoke again, louder this time, addressing the entire gathering. Some of you may have heard whispers. I'll speak plainly. He reached into his coat pocket and retrieved a slim, worn, but deliberate folder. After my medical records were mysteriously sealed, he explained, I hired someone. A private investigator. And he found more than I ever anticipated. A murmur rippled through the crowd. He walked to a small table near the center of the room and carefully spread out a series of photographs, official documents, and what made everyone lean forward, printed screenshots. These, he said, tapping one image, are surveillance stills, taken just after midnight, 3 months ago. Everyone strained to see. One image showed my father, Richard, entering a building that appeared to be a legal office. Another showed him again, same place, different night. Beside those was a copy of an affidavit, supposedly signed by Grandpa, declaring him mentally unfit to manage the estate. The signature was shaky, erratic, nothing like Grandpa's steady, familiar cursive I'd seen my whole life on birthday cards and checkbooks. A gasp escaped from somewhere behind me, then another. I turned toward Jason. His eyes met mine, then immediately dropped. You knew? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he shifted his weight, as if the very floor had suddenly turned unstable beneath him. I didn't want to go along with it, he stammered, his voice cracking. Mom said it was just temporary, just until Grandpa, you know. I didn't move. He took a hesitant step forward, trying to bridge the gap between us. I didn't know they'd cut you out completely. I swear, Kais, I didn't know they'd go that far. Grandpa's voice cleaved through the room like a sharp blade. And yet, you were the first one to lock her out of the vineyard. You changed the security codes. You barred her from the harvest celebration. You watched her name get erased. And you said nothing. Jason looked as though he'd been physically struck. Behind me, one of the bridesmaids slipped off her heels and muttered, I didn't sign up for this circus. To my right, Lily's father discreetly signaled an attendant. Bring the car around. We're finished here. The room was dissolving rapidly. Lily sobbed. Into her hands, her veil drooping down her back like a white flag of surrender. Her mother's gaze flickered between Grandpa, the damning documents, and her husband. The tension was so thick it was almost palpable. And me? I just stood there. The phantom sting from my mother's slap still echoed on my cheek, a ghost of a burn I couldn't ignore, but I refused to touch it. I wouldn't grant her the satisfaction. She was watching me now, glaring, as if daring me to speak again. And I did. "You told me I didn't belong here," I said, turning to face her fully. "You made it unequivocally clear. Every birthday I wasn't invited to. Every holiday dinner where my chair was mysteriously missing. Every time you called me ungrateful because I didn't contribute money for Jason's wedding." She hissed back, "You still don't belong. You never did." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. "I used to believe that," I said quietly. "I used to think I was the black sheep, the disappointment, the outsider. But now I see with perfect clarity. I was never the embarrassment. You were." Gasps again. A few people clutched their pearls. Actual pearls. One uncle turned and simply walked out. A distant cousin near the cake table snatched her purse, as if it might shield her from whatever fresh drama was about to unfold. Jason remained motionless. Lily crumpled into a chair, shaking uncontrollably. My father clenched his jaw and averted his gaze. And then, through the silence, Grandpa reached into another inside pocket. Slowly, deliberately, he stepped toward me. His eyes, fierce, exhausted, yet intensely proud, met mine. He extended a folded paper, thick, cream-colored, embossed with a distinctive seal. "I never stopped believing in you," he said, his voice low, but unwavering. "And they won't erase you again." I looked down. It was the deed to the vineyard. My name was printed boldly right on top. Grandpa's hand lingered in the air a fraction longer than expected before the deed settled gently in my lap. The paper wasn't pristine. Its edges were softly curled. A faint coffee ring marred one corner. But the signature, bold, unmistakably his, stared up at me like a long-buried secret finally unearthed. I said nothing at first. My fingers traced the ink slowly, then tightened around the edges, unsure whether to safeguard it or tear it apart. Grandpa settled beside me on the long leather sofa, his posture straighter than I'd seen in years. He looked utterly drained, not from age, but from something deeper, like a man who had kept too much hidden for far too long. "You checked the signature twice," he said softly. "It's authentic," I nodded. "I know it is. That's not what's so hard to grasp." He exhaled slowly through his nose. "I made the change the day I witnessed your mother discard your college admission letter. Stanford, wasn't it?" I blinked. I hadn't revisited that day in years. "You saw that." "She told the housekeeper it was junk mail," he murmured, but I recognized the envelope, and I recognized her face when she threw it. That was the exact moment I realized something had gone profoundly wrong. I tried to form words, but the air in my chest refused to budge. All I could manage was, "Why didn't you tell me?" "I wanted to," he admitted, "but I believed protecting you quietly was preferable to thrusting you into the middle of a war." It turns out I gravely underestimated just how far they would go. The room was quiet, save for the gentle ticking of the old wall clock and the occasional shifting of logs in the hearth. Outside the suite's window, the vineyard's night lights shimmered on the slope like scattered jewels. He leaned back, his fingers clasped on his knee. "I entrusted a San Francisco lawyer to hold everything until your 30th birthday. That was the original plan. But I never received anything because your mother intercepted it." His voice dropped. "She forged a medical power of attorney 6 months ago. Informed the court I was in decline. Claimed early dementia. It allowed her to override every legal instruction I had left." I stared at him, utterly stunned. "She filed the paperwork with your uncle's notary and sealed it with a physician's note from her friend. Someone who hadn't examined me in 10 years. So even this deed, technically legal when I signed it, was, with the POA in place, voided in practice. They held the advantage. They just didn't anticipate me showing up today." I rubbed my temples. All this time, I'd believed I was simply disappointing them. Not accomplished enough. Not successful like Jason. Not worthy of their fight. "You weren't the failure, Kais. You were the threat." The words struck hard. I leaned forward, elbows resting on my knees, staring into the dormant fireplace. Every meeting where Jason cut me off mid-sentence. Every instance my mom called me too sensitive. Every holiday where I ended up in the kitchen, silently doing dishes while they toasted each other's achievements. I felt something rising in my throat. Not quite a sob, not quite anger. It was something softer, yet heavier. I wanted to believe family still meant something, I whispered, even when it hurt. Grandpa looked at me with the same expression he'd worn when I was a child and fell off my bike, but tried not to cry. Family does mean something, he said. But not all blood is worthy of the word. Silence stretched between us. My hands tightened around the deed. What's the point of owning something they've already poisoned? I asked, barely audible. Every inch of that vineyard is soaked in their contempt. I'd rather burn it down. He didn't flinch. You could. Or, he reached forward, placing a wrinkled hand over mine. You could unpoison it with truth. I sat back, letting his words settle around me like fine dust. Truth. What a strange, potent thing. It doesn't erase pain. It simply demands you stop pretending it didn't happen. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I sat perfectly still with that paper in my lap, the quiet hum of memories pressing in. Eventually, I rose and moved to the corner bookshelf. I pulled down a folder, one I hadn't touched since my college days. Inside were pages of meticulous notes, delicate sketches, ambitious plans, a vineyard redesign I had once passionately dreamed of. I'd entirely forgotten it was even there. I used to envision creating a label that honored Grandma's name, I said, gently turning through the pages. Simple, clean, authentic, just like her. She taught me how to prune vines before I even learned to drive. Grandpa's eyes ignited with something fierce and tender all at once. Then that's precisely what we'll do. Start there and reclaim it all. My hand paused on a sketch of a label, Eleonora's Table, in soft, flowing script across a bottle. I smiled faintly, and for a brief moment, a profound peace settled in the room. Not because the pain had vanished, but because for the first time in years, the truth finally had a place to reside. But that peace didn't last. Because even as I traced the outline of a dream I thought I'd long buried, my mother was already setting her next move in motion. One that would make everything I held in my hands feel like dry kindling, waiting for a single match. The crumpled deed still lay on my nightstand when the phone jolted me awake. A single, shrill vibration in the hushed early morning. I blinked at the caller ID, Matteo. My stomach coiled. I hadn't heard from him in years, not since he'd quietly left the vineyard after Jason's restructuring of the staff. The call was brief. You need to come now, Matteo's voice was a hushed, urgent whisper. They're about to dump everything. I didn't ask for clarification. I simply snatched my jacket, keys, and the small, portable voice recorder Grandpa had pressed into my hand earlier. In case they try to bury more than your name, he'd said, his eyes unblinking since dinner. He'd wanted to come, but the emotional toll of the evening had been too much. Record everything, he'd whispered. Don't let them erase her again. By the time my car crunched onto the gravel path of the vineyard gates, the stars were already fading. I pulled up to the facility's back entrance. The main lights remained off, but a faint strip of yellow bled from beneath a side door. Matteo stood there, hoodie up, ball cap pulled low. His hands trembled noticeably. They're moving fast, he muttered, swiping a key card through the side panel. Follow me. Stay silent. We slipped through narrow, dimly lit corridors, past stacked crates and forgotten barrels. We ducked past a small office where a computer monitor still blinked with an idle screen. Then he halted. Pinned to a bulletin board was a laminated sheet, Emergency Cleaning Protocol, approved by M. Winstead. My mother's signature. She put it up last week, Matteo explained. I thought it was just a formality. But tonight. He pushed open the door to the fermentation chamber. I stepped inside, and the air slammed into me, a caustic mix of ammonia and chemicals. A thin, menacing foam clung to the inner rims of 3 massive steel tanks. One hissed ominously. I instinctively pulled my sleeve over my nose. What is that? I asked, recoiling. Solvent, Matteo whispered. Industrial grade. Not just for sanitizing. Someone poured it into the tanks. My stomach twisted violently. This batch? Was it the Syrah? He gave a single, grim nod. The last one your grandmother ever helped blend. I staggered back, my hand finding the cool wall for support. The sting in my eyes wasn't solely from the fumes. Mateo reached into his hoodie pocket and produced a USB stick. I copied the security footage before they could wipe it. Jason came in after hours, twice. And he wasn't alone. I stared at the tiny drive in his palm. Why are you showing me this? Because he offered me 10 grand to say it was an accident. I froze. And you refused? He hesitated. I took the money. And I gave it to you instead. Because you're the only one who ever treated this place like more than a trophy. Something snapped inside my chest. Not a loud, violent break, but the kind of felt snap, deep behind my ribs, like a rope pulled taut for too long. I turned and walked toward the tank, a dull silver behemoth now marred by betrayal. My reflection warped grotesquely across its surface. She spent her last summer blending this, I whispered. Every night, she'd come in with her tasting book. Said she wanted one last vintage. Something to outlive her. Mateo remained silent. He didn't need to speak. They hadn't simply tried to sabotage the wine. They'd tried to erase her. I pulled out my phone and began photographing everything. The foam, the tank labels, the posted protocol. Mateo handed me a sealed bottle he'd managed to salvage from an untouched batch. You'll need this for testing. I nodded, my fingers trembling as I dropped the USB into my purse. Then I drove. I didn't drive straight back. I couldn't. The road stretched endlessly ahead, my headlights carving temporary tunnels through the deep darkness. At a gentle bend past the county line, I pulled over. There was a quiet turnout near an old walnut grove. I stepped out of the car, leaving the door ajar. The engine ticked softly as it cooled. The sky was beginning to transform, inky blue slowly bleeding into a faint, ethereal strip of pink dawn. And I stood there, frozen in the half-light, hugging myself tight. If I expose this, I said aloud, my voice raw, I destroy the family name. My own breath plumed in the cold air. But if I stay quiet, she dies a second time. I closed my eyes, and a vivid image of Grandma materialized, leaning over a barrel, brushing a stray strand of hair from her face, smiling at me, her fingers stained purple from the grapes. Wine is like memory, she'd once told me. It preserves who we are if we only protect it. I didn't cry. I simply got back into the car, pulled out my old contacts list, and tapped the name of a toxicologist I'd collaborated with on a college lab project in Santa Rosa. When she answered, I spoke clearly, concisely. I need a rush analysis, industrial solvent, possibly methyl ethyl ketone. She confirmed she'd meet me in 2 hours. I ended the call. The sky behind me had shifted from lavender to molten gold, light rising, but my chest felt heavier than ever. And somewhere between the sharp sting of rage and the crushing weight of grief, I finally stopped asking for their love. I drove the rest of the way in silence, the sunrise doing little to warm the frost behind my eyes. My fingers gripped the steering wheel so tightly I thought it might shatter. By the time I reached the vineyard's main office, the parking lot was already half full. Sleek black sedans lined up in somber procession, as if for a funeral. In a profound way, they were. The boardroom was nestled behind thick oak doors at the estate building's rear. I didn't bother to knock. I walked in mid-sentence. Jason was speaking, his hands gesturing expansively, like a salesman attempting to spin a catastrophe into a golden opportunity. He stopped. Everyone stopped. I uttered not a single word. I simply placed the bottle of Grandma's poison wine, the one Mateo had salvaged, right in the center of the polished table. Then, the flash drive. A few people exchanged wary glances. My mother didn't even attempt to mask her disgust. You don't belong here, she declared, her voice frigid. You were removed from the board. I didn't so much as blink. I walked to the built-in projector and inserted the drive. The screen on the wall flickered to life. Footage began to play. Jason entering the fermentation wing after hours, glancing over his shoulder, then the precise timestamp. Then, the undeniable moment he poured something into the tank, frame by frame, rendered with crystal clarity. No one spoke. Not until Mateo appeared at the doorway. She's telling the truth, he said, his voice low but resolute. He paid me to keep quiet. I gave the money to charity, and I brought her here instead. Jason shot to his feet, his face flushed scarlet. This is a setup. A family vendetta. Sit down, a legal officer commanded. One of the shareholders, a quiet man from Napa I barely recognized, added, "This footage, if verified, constitutes intentional product sabotage. That's a felony-level offense. And if your name's on that safety override protocol." He turned his piercing gaze to my mother. I didn't need to utter another sound. The camera cut to a photo I'd captured of the emergency protocol. Her signature was emblazoned across the bottom. This wine, I finally managed to say, my voice catching, was the last blend Grandma ever helped craft before she passed. You didn't just ruin a product. You desecrated her memory. My father's voice cracked through the stunned silence. You'll destroy us all, Kais. Think about what you're doing. I am, I replied. I thought about it all night. The door creaked open again. This time, it was Grandpa. He moved deliberately, leaning on his cane. But his gaze was as sharp as ever. He didn't speak at first, merely handed a thick envelope to the attorney who trailed behind him. About a year ago, Grandpa announced, I revised the family trust. Whispers rippled across the room. My mother visibly stiffened. Jason looked as though he'd been physically struck across the mouth. I no longer trust this board, Grandpa stated plainly. Too much ego, too little legacy. The lawyer cleared his throat and opened the envelope. Effective immediately, Kayla Ventnor holds full power of attorney over all family operations. The land, the winery, and associated assets are secured under a separate estate trust under her name. My breath hitched. Grandpa turned to my mother, his tone almost gentle. You disowned your daughter out of pride. You called her a burden, an embarrassment. But now, it's her name that saves you from utter collapse. Jason shoved back his chair, the sound grating, and stormed out. No one attempted to stop him. He slammed the door so violently the projector flickered. My mother simply sat there, blinking rapidly. We were protecting the brand, she murmured, a desperate, fading whisper. No, I said quietly. You were protecting your ego, and you were willing to burn everything to the ground just to maintain control. She looked at me then, not with affection, not even with hatred, but with sheer confusion, as if I were a stranger she'd never recognized. But I wasn't the one who had changed. After the boardroom emptied, I lingered for a moment longer, alone in the silence. The storm had passed, yet its bitter, dry aftertaste still clung to the corners of my mouth. I collected the poison wine bottle, the legal documents, and my grandmother's folded vineyard sketch, the one Mateo had quietly offered. My fingers gently brushed its worn edges, and I held it close to my chest as I stepped outside. The evening light stretched long and amber over the hills, transforming the rows of vines into swaying shadows that danced with the breeze. There was something sacred about that hour, when the sun dipped low but hadn't quite vanished. A kind of reverent hush that invited introspection, not chatter. I didn't head straight for the main house. My legs moved of their own accord, following the winding path that curved behind the fermentation barn, leading to the lower garden, her garden. No one visited it anymore. The gravel crunched softly under my boots as I reached the weathered bench where she used to hum melodies while pruning. I could almost detect the citrus scent from her old soap, feel her callous fingers guiding mine when I was small, and couldn't discern a strong bud from a lost cause. That place hadn't altered much, but I had. I knelt beside the ancient vine where she always kept her small wooden crate. Back then, it held gardening gloves, twine, and those peculiar lozenges she swore made her singing better. The soil was parched, cracked. I ran my hands through it anyway, just to feel closer to her. That's when I noticed something poking out, metal, dulled with age. My breath hitched. I dug carefully, brushing away dirt from the edges until I unearthed a rusted tin box. It wasn't locked, merely latched. My fingers hesitated before flipping it open. Inside, a folded envelope, wrapped in delicate linen cloth and a single, dried grape leaf. Its stem was brittle, but still shaped like a tiny, outstretched hand. The handwriting on the envelope was unmistakable, Takais. My throat tightened. I opened the envelope slowly, the linen crinkling like ancient fabric finally seeing the light of day. Her handwriting flowed across the page with that same steady grace, the kind only a woman who sang to plants and outlasted betrayal could possibly possess. If you're reading this, it began, then you already know the truth. I blinked back, the heat rising behind my eyes. They never saw your strength, child. But I did. I saw it when you bandaged birds. When you gave away your share of pie to Lily. When you let your mother's silence define your self-worth just so peace could last one more dinner. You always gave more than you were given. That's your power. But don't let them define your worth. I pressed the letter against my chest. I could hear her in the silence. Not her words, but her spirit. Not lecturing, not warning, just holding space for me. This land doesn't belong to the loudest. It belongs to the one who knows how to love it back. I folded the letter, not with grief, but with something steadier. Reverence, perhaps. I sat on the bench, watching the horizon where dusk began to merge into night. The wind stirred again, soft now. The vines rustled, as if murmuring secrets among themselves. I tilted my head, and for a fleeting flicker of a second, I thought I heard her humming. Just a phrase, maybe two. Faint, but real enough to steal my breath. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I had to plead for space here. I didn't feel like a careful visitor. I felt home. I closed my eyes and let the quiet embrace me. I'd been fighting so relentlessly for justice, clawing back every shred of dignity they'd tried to strip away. But here, beneath these vines, with her voice still echoing in the air, I didn't have to fight. I could simply be. The soft sound of approaching footsteps broke the spell. I turned. Mateo stood a few yards away, holding a lantern. He didn't utter a word at first, simply walked over and settled beside me, placing a rolled-up parchment on my lap. I unfurled it. It was Grandma's original blueprint for the vineyard's expansion, hand-drawn, its corners weathered, annotated in red ink with names of grape varietals and intricate irrigation lines. She wanted this to grow, he said quietly. With you. I nodded slowly. Then I'll rebuild it. Not out of spite, but out of love. The words came easily, unforced, simply honest. We sat there a little while longer. I asked him for a pencil and a notebook and began to mark spots where new rows could run, sloping rows near the ridge for Pinot, a fragrant pergola where the wild roses used to bloom. And one small plot, I drew a heart around it and labeled it Carmen's Grace. By the time the first stars pierced the darkening sky, the air had cooled considerably. The vines looked softer in the starlight, almost as if they were patiently waiting. As the first stars appeared, I whispered to the vines, "Thank you for waiting." I stayed in the garden longer than I had planned. My fingers brushed over the leaves, as if I were committing them to memory. The quiet had transformed. It no longer felt empty. It felt full, as if something vital had returned. 3 weeks later, the vineyard was no longer a forgotten place. It was vibrant, alive. That evening, the garden glowed under paper lanterns strung from the ancient olive trees. Tables were elegantly set with white linen, rustic bowls brimming with local cheeses and fresh-baked bread. There were no photographers, no meticulously rehearsed speeches, just people who had genuinely cared. Old neighbors, a few steadfast workers, friends of my grandmother. Even the mayor had arrived, clad in khakis and worn boots, carrying a bottle of wine older than I was. I wore a simple navy dress, but it was the delicate grapevine brooch, pinned precisely over my heart, that held the most significance. It had belonged to my grandmother. Mateo had discovered it tucked away in the back of her desk drawer, carefully wrapped in a handkerchief bearing her initials. As I greeted guests, poured wine, and passed around fresh rosemary focaccia, I tried to remain centered. My hands moved steadily. My smile remained gentle. But deep inside, I was holding my breath. Not from fear anymore, but from sheer disbelief. For the first time in years, something truly beautiful was unfolding, and no one was trying to wrench it away from me. Until I saw them. My parents and my brother arrived, striding in as if the entire estate still belonged to their exclusive ownership. My mother wore beige, expensive, cinched tight at the collar, and moved with the bearing of someone who expected an audience. My father offered no pretense of a smile, and Jason, stiff in a navy jacket that didn't quite fit, surveyed the property with the calculating gaze of someone running numbers in his head. I kept my shoulders straight and offered a cool, concise nod. "Kais," my mother said, her voice like ice as she swept past. "Nice little gathering. Don't get too used to it." I said nothing. I wasn't there to engage in conflict. Not tonight. They mingled, quietly scanning the crowd, undoubtedly wondering who might be worth impressing. But no one seemed remotely interested in them. People stayed put, glasses in hand, chatting about the grapevines, inquiring about the new press I'd ordered, or complimenting the rosemary hedges I'd planted near the fence line. This was no longer their stage. A black SUV pulled into the gravel drive just as the sun dipped below the hills. Heads turned, and the atmosphere subtly shifted. It was Grandpa. Mateo stepped forward to assist him from the car, but Grandpa waved him off with that familiar, gruff determination I remembered from my childhood. He walked slowly, yet with unwavering purpose, his cane tapping a steady rhythm on the path as he made his way through the garden. His suit was old but impeccably pressed. His hands, thinner and more spotted now, still exuded strength. When he reached me, he paused just long enough to offer a knowing nod. I extended my arm. He took it. We walked together to the wooden riser we'd positioned beside the pergola. As Mateo adjusted the microphone, Grandpa cleared his throat, took the glass of wine I handed him, and raised it. To the one, he declared, his voice firm and deliberate, who remembered what family is truly meant to be. A hush fell over the gathering. Even the lanterns seemed to hold their flicker. "This vineyard no longer belongs to me," he continued, "and it hasn't for a while. It belongs to Kayla, not because of her name, not because of blood, but because she remembered what it meant to love this land and the people who painstakingly built it." My throat tightened. He wasn't finished. By my hand, by Carmen's wish, and by the deeds Kayla carried in silence. She is the rightful heir. The crowd murmured softly. From the side, I heard Jason scoff. "You can't do that," he barked, stepping forward as if jolted awake from a bad dream. "This is a family estate. You can't just give it away." Grandpa didn't flinch. He turned slowly. "Watch me." My father opened his mouth, but before a single word escaped, a calm voice from the back spoke up. "I can confirm everything has already been finalized." A man in a gray suit stepped out of the crowd. "Mr. Landry, the estate lawyer. Deeds were transferred 3 weeks ago. It's done. Irrevocable." My mother's face drained of all color. She looked around the garden as if the walls were closing in on her. "This is ludicrous," she hissed. "You're tearing this family apart." No one moved. No one came to her defense. Not even Jason. She stormed out, her heels snapping angrily against the gravel. Jason followed, muttering something under his breath I couldn't quite catch. My father stood for a moment longer, then walked off after them, a silent, defeated figure. I exhaled, a slow, quiet release. The guests gently shifted back into their conversations. Some clapped softly, others offered warm, sympathetic smiles, but no one mentioned my family again. Later, I took the microphone. My hands did not tremble. "I wasn't raised to believe I'd ever be standing here," I said. "And perhaps that's what makes this moment truly significant. Because nothing about this was simply handed to me. It was planted. It grew." I held up my glass. To the quiet strength that protected us, to the love that endured, and to the roots that held firm when nothing else did. They toasted with me. Not merely out of politeness. I could genuinely feel it. After the guests gradually trickled out, Mateo stayed behind, helping to fold chairs and gather the empty glasses. We stacked dishes in comfortable, quiet companionship. Then we sat on the very garden bench where I'd once imagined Grandma humming. "You made this home again," he said, his voice low and certain. I looked around at the intertwining vines, the soft lights, the still air holding all of it. "It always was," I replied. "I just needed to come back differently." When he eventually left, I stayed behind, alone, but not lonely. I walked between the rows of grapes, their shadows long and ethereal under the moonlight. My shoes scuffed the soil. I reached the small plaque we'd installed that very morning. It was simple brass, affixed to a stone base just beside the main vine. It read, "For Carmen. For those who bloom after being buried." I touched its cool edge, then the soil beneath. The air was perfectly still. This land was mine. Not out of retribution, but because I had remembered it, had nurtured it when no one else would. What would you have done in my shoes? How do you stand up when your own family tries to bury you? Let me know in the comments below. I'm genuinely curious to hear your thoughts.